I'm at Cafe Versailles. We don't know what the game plan going forward is, but the motorcade is stopped. You can see that protection detail now fanned out in the streets. And I believe we're going to see him. There's the former president. Our Guad Venegas is somewhere there in the crowd. Guad, what can you tell us about this stop?
Lester, there's supporters have been waiting here for hours now, and you can hear the crowd cheering. We're actually right. What you're seeing is a glass that separates the outside of the Versailles bakery. We're right outside the glass. We can see Donald Trump speaking to supporters. Local politicians have been waiting for him for some time now. And I'll go back to you as we
listen in.
We'll keep the camera on Trump.
Mr. Trump, but just to be clear, this was a planned stop. Maybe you've lost Guad as well, but we'll watch this scene play out. Hallie?
Yeah, sometimes you see presidents do this, obviously former presidents do this, make this kind of unscheduled, quote-unquote, surprise stop to a place, a location. In this instance, there's Guad. It's Cafe Versailles. Very classic campaign stop. Politicians, people running for president visit here quite often. Obviously, a lot of supporters who have crowded in there. Obviously, we have no microphone next to him. We can't hear what he's saying.
But this goes back to what we were talking about. Is this Donald Trump candidate or
That's
Donald
right.
Trump defendant? This looks like the candidate.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Because presumably in the minutes after a federal arraignment, you would not be going and making a stop and talking politically with all of your reporters, right? And this, supporters, I should say. And so this is an instance where you're seeing Donald Trump do what he often does, find people who are loyal to him, feed off the energy of a crowd that likes him in a moment when he is feeling attacked.
And in a moment, the nation is watching.
And in a moment, the nation is watching. He is somebody who, they say it all the time, right? For years, he kind of controlled those so-called banners on the bottom of the screen, those words that say right now, Donald Trump visits supporters. He understands the power of an image. And this is part and parcel of that, it seems to me.
All right, but if you're a Republican now running for the nomination against Donald Trump and you're watching this and you've been afraid to criticize him, tell me how that works out.
I think you hold your powder like we've seen many of them do, Lester, obviously with the exception of Chris Christie, who has been one of the more vocal voices against Donald Trump. What I have heard is that you have some people, as he gets closer to our microphone, I'll stop talking, but you have seen some people waiting to see where does the wave go. That's how one Republican campaign source put it to me for a rival campaign. We don't need to ride the wave now. We can see where the wave goes. Don't get out too early criticizing Donald Trump, but keep your options open.
In another context, this would be described as a victory lap, but far from it. Far from it. This is a man that less than an hour ago, or just minutes ago, actually walked out of a federal courthouse, indicted for the second time since April. We're going to hear him now. Here we go.
Thank you very much, darling. You take care of yourself. Where's Jorge? Right here, sir. Come on, let's get a picture. Come on. This guy, great champ. Just don't fight him.
One this way, sir. Justin, one this way.
Trump tiene que salir de presidente otra vez. Tiene que salir otra vez de presidente.
Look at the outside.
Happy birthday to you.
birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Jordan. Happy birthday to
Juan Venegas is there at the Versailles restaurant. It's a Miami landmark in the Cuban community. And it is where Donald Trump and his motorcade have chosen to stop before heading to the airport and on to Bedminster in New Jersey. Juan Venegas, can you hear me?
Lester, yes, I can hear you. We're standing just a few feet away from where Donald Trump is speaking to local supporters. This is a significant stop. Lester, you mentioned, why is Donald Trump here? Well, this Café Versailles in Miami is sort of the headquarters of Latino Republicans. This is a place where they've come once and again to demonstrate in favor of Donald Trump, in favor of the Republican Party. And this stop will have a lot of meaning to that community in South Florida and in Florida in general. This is a Latino community that has supported Donald Trump from the beginning. And today they've shown up here in the dozens. As you can see, he continues speaking to them inside the bakery, Lester.
And the crowd singing happy birthday to the former president. Tomorrow is his birthday, to point out.
It's worth noting, Walt Nauta is alleged co-conspirator and body man, even with him in this moment. You can see him off to the screen at different points. We'll probably see him in a few minutes, still serving as sort of the go-between for him and some of these supporters.
And if I understand the order right, he's allowed to
he's allowed to be with
him, just not talk about the case.
He's allowed to travel with him, just not talk about the case. But again, just the optics of it, just minutes after appearing in court together, in a sort of a celebration stance, the kind of thing you might see after you've been cleared by a jury instead of after your first appearance in arraignment.
He made a few comments, and it was very difficult to hear, but essentially rigged, corrupt system, teased ahead, quote unquote, and I'm using news producer parlance, but talked about the speech that he is going to be delivering later on tonight in Bedminster. But these are the first comments that you are hearing from the former president. Again, unsurprising in concept. This is what he has Truth Social. Now he is sort of saying it verbally here to this crowd of just adoring supporters with, as Guad points out, an important political context and backdrop here in South Florida as he gets ready to head back in his car and presumably now head on to the airport to fly up to Bedminster, where they are ready for him. They've got the chairs out and ready to go.
Chuck Todd, you're watching this. Your thoughts?
Look, surreal. We've always run out of adjectives to describe anything Donald Trump does, but my word, I mean, we've not seen something like this in the United States before, where a political figure like this is under legal threat and he goes to celebrate, and there are people there ready to celebrate, and we've seen this take place in other countries where you've had corrupt, political figures accused of corruption do this, and sometimes they've had success, sometimes they've had failure. It's a very familiar scene to South Floridians watching sometimes the politics of Central and South America, where you see these moments. But clearly he is wrapping himself in this sort of, there is a faction of South Florida, very conservative MAGA Hispanics who are very much rally around, sort of almost see common cause of the injustices of America with Cuba and Venezuela, and he's trying to wrap himself in this, in the sort of the folks who claim they're exiles in the exile community, and it's a real perversion of what the exile community used to fight for. I mean, this is what makes it so surreal to see it here in the United States. We were the safe haven for those that were escaping moments like this. It's just what a bizarre moment, and I think again, it's going to take years for us to understand it.
NBC's Garrett Hake was in the courthouse during the entire arraignment. Garrett, tell us what you saw, your impressions, the color in the room, if you will.
Well, Lester, I saw a former president who appeared visibly irritated to be in that room at all today. Unlike in the New York arraignment, by the time reporters were brought into the room, Mr. Trump and his counsel were already seated. And for most of the hour or so we spent in this courtroom together, he sat with his arms tightly crossed against his chest and spoke only to his co-counsels on either side of him. He did not do his own not guilty plea that was made on his behalf by one of his attorneys. And I never saw him turn over his shoulder to look towards the center of the courtroom. If he had, he would have seen Special Counsel Jack Smith, who was sitting behind the prosecutor's table in the audience himself, watching over the proceedings. Smith, much looser in conversation with attorneys around him, off and on throughout the course of the proceedings. Mr. Trump at a table with just his attorneys. I did not see any of his political aides, family members, anyone else accompanying him in and out of the courtroom today. But, we've been through two of these now, Lester, and I have to tell you, having covered Donald Trump as a candidate and as the president and now as a criminal defendant, you can tell that he is, this is not a person who's put in a situation in which he is not in control all that often. And to be a guest of the state, to be not have his personal freedom for even that period of time, where he has to sit and wait for reporters and members of the public to file in, to be told to stand by a judge and when to sit by a judge, is not a situation in which he finds himself comfortable. And he expressed that physically throughout the course of the hearing. On the way out, again, not making eye contact with anybody else in the room, never turning towards the prosecution's side of the room for the duration of the time that he was in the room. Among the prosecutors, a much lighter atmosphere. At the end of the hearing, as the prosecutors filed out another door, Jack Smith, the special counsel, coming up, kind of slapping another prosecutor on the back, throwing his arm around him as they left the room together. So kind of a fascinating scene, having, again, now covered two of these. The sort of visible discomfort that Donald Trump presents while in the room under the control of, in this case, federal marshals and the Secret Service protecting him, but also keeping him in custody in that hearing room. Lester?
Garrett, did Mr. Trump have any family members accompanying him?
No one, Lester. Likewise in the New York hearing, no family members, no personal aides, no political aides, and in this case, not even Boris Epstein, who's kind of been a legal consigliere to Donald Trump on these other cases. He appeared but didn't speak in the New York case. In this case, it was only the two federal attorneys, Todd Blanche and Chris Kise, who attested to the judge that they'll be Mr. Trump's attorneys permanently, they said, for both trial and appellate purposes going forward. They and the protective detail that accompanies Mr. Trump everywhere as a former president, the only people joining him in the courtroom today.
All right, Garrett, thanks. Let's go to Gabe Gutierrez. Gabe was also in the courthouse for the first part of this hearing and arraignment. What were some of the things that stuck out to you, Gabe?
Well, Lester, some of the things that Garrett mentioned, just how surreal it was to see the former president of the United States in a courtroom having to see all this play out and staying silent. Now, this hearing was different. According to the people who were in the room for the entire arraignment, the former president did not utter a word. That is different from the first court appearance from the first arraignment 2 months ago, where he did enter his guilty plea. What's also different, Lester, is we're just starting to see these sketches from inside the courtroom. Remember, this is different from the arraignment in Lower Manhattan, where a judge did allow some pool photography, those still images, and the cameras in the hallway. We did not see that here. And if you can see, as we're looking at that sketch, I can tell you that was what I had described earlier. The far left of that sketch was Walt Nauda's attorney. Then second from the left right there is Walt Nauda. Then Todd Blanche, former President Trump's attorney, there in the middle. Then the former president, obviously, and then Chris Kise to the far right. That is how the courtroom was laid out. Behind that is where members of the media, including Garrett and some of our other colleagues, were there. I can tell you from watching from the media overflow room, watching the attention of the world, really looking at this federal courthouse in Miami, is just incredible to see a former president go through this. I can tell you also, Lester, as someone who grew up in Miami, seeing the former president now in Cafe Versailles, as you have been describing, a landmark here in Miami, also incredible to see. I was there during the 2016 election in the hours after the former president was President Trump was elected, and there was incredible celebration there. So it's frankly no surprise, really, that he would head there before heading back to New Jersey. Also striking, and I believe my colleague Laura Jarrett mentioned it, to see Walt Nauta there with the former president in that video as he went to Versailles. So many questions about how this plays out. Of course, Walt Nauta now back here potentially later this month for his formal arraignment once he gets local counsel to sponsor him. He has not yet entered a plea. But so much of this is unprecedented in terms, what type of conversations will the former president be allowed to have with Walt Nauta to other members of his staff? And that is an outstanding question that his legal team wanted clarity on. Who can he speak with? And again, according to our colleagues reporting that they came down at that question by saying that he can speak to his employees, he just can't speak about the case. But also, along with Garrett, having covered 2 of these arraignments now just in the past several months, just a surreal experience to witness a former president of the United States, first arraigned on state charges, now arraigned in the federal court system. Just a remarkable scene here in South Florida. Lester?
All right, Gabe Gutierrez, thank you for your excellent reporting from the courtroom and coming out to give us some more of the details. I want to bring back our chief White House correspondent, Kristen Welker, for some final thoughts about what we've seen, where this goes, and what the lasting impact of all this could be. Kristen?
Well, Lester, I keep thinking about the fact that I was outside the courthouse in New York when former President Trump was arraigned for the first time. And the word that keeps coming to my mind as we watch these extraordinary scenes unfold is the word somber. This is yet another somber day for this country. A former president has now been indicted on federal charges. It will undoubtedly deepen the divides within this country, make the election cycle that much more complicated and complex, and yet the nation awaiting to see if there will be yet more charges. So the politics of it we will continue to follow and track. But Lester, this is an inflection point, yet another inflection point for the country as it wrestles with these deep divides around the former president, around these legal challenges that he is facing, Lester.
And Laura, I want to get your final thoughts, but I'm thinking about how we've talked about this was a pretty perfunctory thing. A federal supposed to be, exactly. Your thoughts?
Obviously, a remarkable moment in so many ways and a highly unusual first appearance here at a federal courthouse. But it's just, again, I think worth marking that we are at the beginning of a very long road. I predict the 3 of us are going to have a lot more conversations about the legal complexities of this case as it moves forward. And it will just be interesting to me to see how much of the legal defense matches up with the political defense we've heard. We've heard the defense of I can do whatever I want as it relates to these documents. I wonder if that will hold up in the court in terms of what his legal team actually puts forth, because that is not what you might call the most robust legal defense to what he's facing here in court. But it'll be interesting to see how those 2 perspectives align.
And worth noting, we could be here, again, when I say here, in a similar situation before this summer is out.
Perhaps in Fulton County, Georgia, or perhaps in Washington as it relates to the special counsel looking into the attack on the Capitol on January 6th. If you go micro and macro, right? Micro, small picture. What does this mean for the Republican field going up against Donald Trump in the race for the White House? We have seen nothing if not Donald Trump have the ability to capitalize on what he sees as attacks against him to make sure that he keeps his grip on the Republican base, a Republican base that will largely determine who ends up going up against President Biden in the race for the White House come 2024. At what point, if any, do some of these other candidates, I'm not talking about Chris Christie, start to sharpen their attacks and go after Donald Trump? Would it be after potentially a Georgia indictment? Would it be after potentially another January 6th indictment from the special counsel? Big picture, this attack on the Justice Department, the idea that the Justice Department has been weaponized, which again, many Republicans believe based on polling. I hear it a lot in my private conversations with people in Republican circles. What does that do to undermine that institution in this country? A Department of Justice that is supposed to have independence, supposed to be perceived as having this independence to be able to conduct investigations, including on the most serious elements of United States national security. Over and over and over again, Republicans are hammering the DOJ, even those who are being a little more nuanced in their criticism of Donald Trump, calling these allegations perhaps serious. How does that play out, big picture, as it relates to the norms of the Justice Department and its proceedings?
The fact that there's much more time in the summer, potentially more indictments along the way. The question is sometimes do the number of cases begin to work in his favor from a political standpoint?
Does it become, and again, from a political standpoint, does it become noise to people who hear Donald Trump and legal problems and who have been hearing that since 2015, Lester?
Yeah. All right. Allie, thank you. Laura, thank you. That concludes our NBC News special report. We'll have much more ahead on our streaming network, NBC News Now, and tonight on NBC Nightly News. I'm Lester Holt. Thank you for watching, everyone. So long for now from Miami.